and the blockade. Now, it's positive news, which is that the problem in Kent has been resolved. Rail, air and sea services between the UK and France are resuming this morning after the French government agreed to ease its travel ban over COVID fears. French citizens, British nationals living in France and hauliers are among those now able to travel if they have a recent negative test. Soldiers have joined NHS Test and Trace staff in Kent to carry out rapid tests on stranded lorry drivers. It's good news, but it's going to take a while to clear. And will it affect food supplies? Let's speak to Tim Rycroft, Chief Operating Officer at the Food and Drink Federation. Tim, hello.
Good morning, Mark.
Obviously, it's been resolved. Fantastic news. But there will be a backlog, won't there?
Yes, there will. It is good news that things are moving again. And now we move into a slightly different challenge, which is, as you say, how do we clear the backlog, but also how do we prioritize those loads that are perishable? So there's a job to be done not only in getting tests to the drivers, but also in sorting out which of those loads are more time sensitive and getting them across the channel as soon as we can. And with something like 4,000 lorries waiting to cross, that's going to take quite some time, perhaps up to a week, we think.
It's a happy coincidence that the supermarkets were stockpiling in anticipation of a possible no-deal Brexit. So that will certainly protect the consumer to a certain extent, won't it?
Well, there are a couple of things I think that have worked in our favour. The first, as you say, of course, is that Christmas is a time when the shops are well stocked. And of course, the government's announcement at the weekend that we were all going to have a smaller Christmas than perhaps we'd planned probably helped a bit as well. So we're certainly not anticipating any issues with food supply in the next few days. But I think as we look into next week, it is imperative that we get the flow moving again if we're not to see at least some localised selective shortages.
And I fear that a lot of the food that has been caught up in this blockade will be thrown away.
Well, food waste is one of the really sad consequences of these lorries being parked up. And there's been a bit of a spotlight thrown on the fact that we export a lot of high quality seafood from this country to the continent at this time of year. And that obviously has a very short shelf life. And if the load is rejected because it's too late, or if it simply goes off, then of course it will have to be disposed of. And that's a terrible shame.
Tim, I won't drag you into the quagmire that is the debate around Brexit and whether you were a Remainer or a Brexiteer.
I've been in that quagmire for 4 years, Mark.
Well, I'm sure you have. But what I will ask you is, I would have thought that as COO of the Food and Drink Federation that you are praying for a deal.
Yes, absolutely. It's still imperative, even at this late stage, that we get a deal. But it's important, I think, that we realise that when we say a deal, what we mean here is a legal document, probably of 800 pages, maybe with 1,000 pages of annexes. So it's far too late now for anyone really to know what the rules are with effect from the 1st of January. So yes, we need a deal, but then we need some sort of agreement on pragmatic enforcement of the new trading rules, because nobody's going to have time to know what the rules are to adjust to them by the 1st of January.
It's pretty clear that hauliers on both sides of the channel will need a sort of soft landing on this one, and let's hope that happens in the event of a deal. What's the worst case scenario for no deal, Tim, for the food and drink industry?
Well, no deal, of course, doesn't mean the shutting of the border, which is what we saw on Sunday night. But it does mean the imposition of new checks, as indeed does a deal, at the borders, and that will slow down freight flow. And as we've seen, particularly for fresh food and drink, moving this stuff quickly and efficiently with the minimum of delays is really important to keep the supply of food going. So we do fear that in the event of no deal, there will be disruption similar to what we've seen, probably not on the same scale, but for quite a long time. And of course, the medium-term challenge of what we've seen just in the last few days is a lot of overseas truckers have come to this country and been stranded. It's very important that they should continue to want to come here. A lot of them are sole traders. They own their truck. They get paid by the job. And one of the things that isn't well understood is that a reasonable percentage of deliveries within this country are done by overseas truckers as part of what's called cabotage. So it's really imperative that they don't find this experience so horrible that they refuse to come here in the future.
Do you anticipate any impact on my listeners in relation to access to food and drink, post a Brexit trade agreement? I mean, could there be any friction that we will really feel directly as consumers in the early months of 2021?
Yes, I mean, I think there will be some disruption to food supplies. It will be selective shortages of certain products at certain times in certain parts of the country. We're not going to run out of food. We're not going to starve. It's very important to say that. But I think we will see the consequences, as I say, of applying frictions to something that currently works in an incredibly seamless and very efficient way.
Might those frictions eventually get sort of resolved over time, or are you suggesting that the friction is going to be there forever?
Well, the government's own worst case scenario, reasonable worst case scenario, as they call it, suggests that the disruption might go on for 6 months. I think everybody assumes that over time, everybody will get better at operating the new rules, that people will become more used to it, that people will know what the paperwork is that they need, and that will reduce the amount of delays that we're seeing. So we expect that it will get better over time, but it could last as long as 6 months.
And of course, the whole point, and I've argued that the debate around no deal is very partisan, and there's a huge focus on the impact on the UK economy and at our ports of a no deal Brexit scenario, but it's just as damaging to the EU. So I therefore consider it to be the nuclear deterrent. And it's the same for the flow of food and drink between ourselves and the EU, that if it's a challenge for us and problematic and damaging, it will also affect them as well, which is why there's got to be pressure on both sides to make this work.
Yeah, I mean, of course, that's absolutely right. Both sides would be hugely damaged by a no deal outcome. And both sides benefit from the free flow of all goods, not only food and drink. And you just hope, even at this late stage, that we can find a way to overcome the sticking point issues which still seem to be holding up a deal, and that we can agree some kind of sensible, even if it's quite a bare bones, free trade agreement with the EU that at least enables us to trade without tariffs and imposing taxes on the products that come across the channel.
Tim, Christmas 2 days away. Is the Prosecco still coming through?
As far as I know, I'm not aware of any issues with Prosecco. I don't look after alcoholic drinks, sadly.
German beer?
German beer, as far as I know, also fine. A lot of that stuff, I suspect, which has a longer shelf life, will come in what are called unaccompanied containers. So I don't think there's any reason why we should have to have a dry Christmas.
Phew, thank goodness for that. We'll end on a very positive note. Thanks for